The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of Denver International Airport as passengers rushed to their gates. Among them was Michael Reynolds, a tall man in his early 40s with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression. He walked with the confidence of someone who knew airports like the back of his hand, pulling a sleek carry-on suitcase behind him. Michael had spent the past week in back-to-back meetings with potential investors and business partners. As the CEO of Horizon Airways, the fifth largest airline in the country, his schedule was always packed. But he preferred to keep his title to himself when traveling. It wasn't that he was hiding who he was. He simply valued these moments of anonymity. They gave him a chance to observe how his airline actually operated when staff didn't know the boss was watching. Today, Michael had dressed for comfort in dark jeans, a navy blue sweater, and comfortable loafers. His wedding ring caught the light as he checked the time on his watch. He still had 45 minutes before boarding began for his flight to Atlanta, where his wife and 2 children were waiting for him. Might as well grab a coffee, he muttered to himself, veering toward a cafe near his gate, cup in hand. Michael settled into a seat with a view of the boarding area and pulled out his phone. 3 new emails from his executive team needed his attention, but his mind was already shifting toward home. His daughter had a dance recital tomorrow evening, and he hadn't missed one yet. The thought made him smile. Being CEO of an airline had its perks, like making sure he was on the right flights to be there for important family moments. The boarding announcement for first class. Passengers finally came over the loudspeaker. Michael gathered his things and joined the small line forming at the gate. He handed his boarding pass to the agent, a young woman named Tanya who scanned it with practiced efficiency. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Reynolds," she said with a professional smile. "Enjoy your flight." Michael thanked her and made his way down the jet bridge. At the airplane door, he was greeted by the lead flight attendant, Gregory, whose face brightened with recognition. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reynolds. Nice to see you flying with us today," Gregory said warmly, though keeping his voice low. Several flight attendants knew Michael by sight, especially those who had been with the company for years, like Gregory. "Thanks, Greg. How's everything going today?" Michael asked. "Running smoothly so far," Gregory replied. "You're in 2B. Can I get you anything once we're in the air?" "Just the usual sparkling water would be great." Michael made his way down the aisle to his seat, placing his carry-on in the overhead bin before settling in. First class was still mostly empty, with just a businessman typing furiously on his laptop across the aisle. Michael pulled out his own tablet, intending to review some proposals before takeoff. 10 minutes later, the cabin was starting to fill. Michael was deep in concentration when he sensed someone standing in the aisle beside him. He looked up to see a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer sunglasses perched on top of her head, and an expression of mild annoyance. "Excuse me," she said, gesturing to the window seat. "I believe that's my seat there." Michael immediately stood up. "Of course, sorry about that." As he stepped into the aisle to let her pass, she hesitated, looking him up and down with slightly narrowed eyes. Her gaze lingered on his casual clothing before she slipped past him without another word. Michael noticed she was dressed in an expensive-looking blazer and silk blouse, several gold bracelets jingling on her wrist as she arranged her designer handbag. The woman, whose name was Patricia Wilson, though Michael wouldn't learn this until later, settled into her seat with a small, dissatisfied sigh. She immediately pressed the call button. Within moments, Gregory appeared. "How can I help you, ma'am? Could I get a glass of champagne before takeoff?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying a note of expectation. "Certainly," Gregory smiled. "Would anyone else care for a pre-flight beverage?" he asked, looking at Michael. "Just water for now, thanks," Michael replied. As Gregory walked away, Patricia gave Michael another sidelong glance. The look held a question, as if she was trying to figure something out. Michael gave her a polite smile and returned to his tablet. Gregory returned promptly with their drinks. "Here you are, Mr. Reynolds," he said as he handed Michael his water. At this, Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. She took a small sip of her champagne before asking, "Do you fly first class often?" There was something in her tone that made Michael pause before answering. "Fairly regularly," he said simply. Patricia hummed, not quite hiding her skepticism. "Business or pleasure?" "Business today," Michael answered, keeping his tone friendly despite the strange undercurrent he was detecting. Heading home to see my family. And what business are you in? She pressed, her eyes now moving more openly between his casual clothes and the premium seat he occupied. Aviation, Michael replied truthfully, though deliberately vague. This interaction was beginning to feel uncomfortable in a familiar way, one he had experienced too many times before. Really? Patricia's voice rose slightly. You know, my husband works with Henderson International. He's the VP of operations there. She said this like it should impress him or perhaps explain her presence in first class. That's a good airline, Michael nodded. They're doing some interesting things with their regional routes. Patricia looked mildly surprised that he actually knew what he was talking about. The conversation might have ended there, but as more passengers filed past them to the main cabin, a young black woman in business attire paused beside their row. Checking her boarding pass with a frown, Gregory appeared again. Can I help you find your seat? Yes, I'm in 12C, but I'm not sure which direction. Main cabin is that way, Gregory pointed with a kind smile. Just past the divider curtain. As the woman thanked him and moved on, Patricia leaned slightly toward Michael and whispered, They really should make the section divisions clearer. Prevents confusion about who belongs where. Michael felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the implication behind her words. He chose not to respond, taking a sip of his water instead. The final pre-boarding announcements came over the intercom, and the remaining first-class passengers took their seats. A well-dressed older man across the aisle nodded at Michael with a smile of recognition, but didn't say anything. As the flight attendants prepared for departure, Patricia rummaged through her bag, pulled out an expensive sleep mask and placed it on her tray table. She then tried to connect to the in-flight Wi-Fi, frowning at her phone in frustration. The Wi-Fi won't fully activate until we're at cruising altitude, Michael explained helpfully. Company policy on all Horizon flights. Patricia glanced at him surprised. And how would you know that? Before Michael could respond, Gregory was making his way through the cabin, checking that seatbelts were fastened and tray tables were up. He stopped at their row. All set here, Mr. Reynolds? He asked with the familiar respect he'd always shown Michael. Ever since Gregory had been promoted to lead flight attendant 3 years ago. All good. Thanks, Greg, Michael replied. As Gregory moved on, Patricia's expression changed subtly. There was a new curiosity in her eyes as she observed the flight attendant's deference. So, she said, her voice lower now. You're a frequent flyer, I take it. You could say that. Michael nodded, returning to his tablet as the safety demonstration began. Patricia wasn't finished. It's just that... She hesitated as if choosing her words carefully. You don't exactly look like the typical first-class passenger. And there it was. Michael had heard variations of this comment throughout his life, even after becoming successful. The implication was always the same. You don't look like you belong here. The unspoken you in that sentence carried the weight of prejudice he'd faced since childhood. And what does a typical first-class passenger look like? Michael asked calmly, meeting her gaze directly for the first time. Patricia flushed slightly. Well, you know, business attire. Most people dress up a bit more for premium cabins. Her eyes flicked meaningfully to his jeans and sweater. I find comfort more important than appearances on flights, Michael said, his voice still even, especially after a long week of meetings. I suppose, Patricia conceded, though her tone suggested she disagreed. She took another sip of her champagne before adding, I just think there should be certain standards, that's all. First class used to mean something. Michael simply nodded and returned to his tablet, choosing not to engage further. The plane began to push back from the gate, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard Horizon Airways Flight 273 to Atlanta. As the safety demonstration concluded, Michael noticed the man across the aisle looking at him with an expression of sympathy, mixed with something else. Recognition, perhaps. But the man quickly returned to his laptop when he saw Michael had noticed. The plane taxied toward the runway, and Michael gazed out at the familiar sight of ground crews going about their work. He thought about the thousands of employees who made each flight possible, from the mechanics who had certified this aircraft this morning, to the flight planners who had mapped their route. As CEO, he felt responsible for all of them. And he thought about Patricia beside him, already closing her eyes behind her sleep mask, unaware that the man she had just subtly insulted was the person who ultimately signed the paychecks of everyone working on this plane. Michael smiled to himself. The flight to Atlanta was just under 3 hours. That gave plenty of time for Patricia to get to know him better, and perhaps learn a valuable lesson about making assumptions. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Michael put his tablet away and leaned back in his seat. This flight was about to get interesting. The aircraft reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Patricia removed her sleep mask and immediately pressed the call button again. Michael glanced up from his tablet, where he'd been reviewing next quarter's fuel cost projections. Gregory appeared within moments. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "My Wi-Fi still isn't working," Patricia complained, holding up her phone. "I have important emails to send." "Let me take a look," Gregory said, leaning slightly over to see her screen. You need to complete the connection process. There should be a prompt to enter your seat number and last name." Patricia tapped on her screen with obvious frustration. "I did that already. It's not working." Michael noticed she was on the wrong screen entirely. Having personally overseen the redesign of Horizon's Wi-Fi system last year, he was intimately familiar with its quirks. "If I may," he offered, gesturing toward her phone. "Sometimes the welcome page gets stuck. If you close your browser completely and try again, that usually fixes it." Patricia hesitated before reluctantly handing over her phone. Her expression suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with him handling her device. But her desire for Wi-Fi apparently won out. Michael closed all her open apps, reopened the browser and navigated to horizonwifi.com, which automatically redirected to the login page. "There you go," he said, handing it back. "Now just enter your information here and here." Patricia took the phone back, holding it as if it might have been contaminated. "Thank you," she said stiffly before turning to Gregory. "Is there any chance I could be moved to another seat? Perhaps one with a bit more space?" Both Michael and Gregory knew perfectly well that all first-class seats on this aircraft had identical dimensions. Gregory's professional smile didn't waver, but Michael caught the brief flicker of recognition in his eyes. Gregory understood exactly what Patricia was implying. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have a full flight today. All first-class seats are occupied," Gregory explained politely. Patricia sighed dramatically. "Fine, I suppose I'll manage." She turned slightly away from Michael, creating as much distance between them as the seating allowed. Gregory caught Michael's eye with a subtle look of apology before asking, "Can I get either of you anything else right now?" "I'm fine, thanks," Michael replied. "Another champagne," Patricia said without looking up from her phone, where she was now successfully connecting to the Wi-Fi. As Gregory moved away, Patricia muttered under her breath, but just loudly enough for Michael to hear. Standards really have slipped these days. They let just anyone into first class now. Michael took a deep breath. He had two choices: confront her prejudice directly or continue observing. As CEO, he made a habit of experiencing his airline as passengers did, both the good and the bad. And unfortunately, what he was witnessing was not uncommon. Flight attendants like Gregory dealt with passengers like Patricia every day. Michael decided to engage one more time. "Is there a problem with my being in this seat?" he asked calmly. Patricia looked startled that he'd addressed her directly. She recovered quickly, forcing a tight smile. "Not at all. I just find it interesting how diverse first class has become. In my husband's day at Henderson International, there was a certain expectation about dress code and presentation. Times change," Michael replied simply. "Most airlines care more about customer comfort than enforcing outdated dress codes these days." Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, well, some traditions were worth keeping. There used to be a sense of occasion about air travel. Now it's like taking a bus." Michael had to suppress a smile at the irony. He'd literally built his career on making Horizon Airways the antithesis of the stuffy, exclusive airline culture Patricia seemed to pine for. Their company motto, "Horizon where everyone belongs," had been his idea. "I think making travel accessible and comfortable for everyone has been a positive change," Michael said. "But then, I'm a bit biased toward today's approach." Patricia looked like she wanted to say more but was interrupted by Gregory returning with her champagne. "Here you are, ma'am," he said, placing it carefully on her tray table. Then he turned to Michael, lowering his voice slightly. "Mr. Reynolds, the captain wanted me to check if you'd had a chance to review the new fuel efficiency report. He mentioned you might want to discuss it before we land." Michael nodded, aware that Patricia was suddenly paying very close attention. Tell him I'll stop by the cockpit later if timing allows. No urgent concerns from my initial review. Gregory nodded and moved on to help other passengers. Patricia was now openly staring at Michael. You know the pilot? She asked, her tone shifting from dismissive to curious. Captain Rivera? Yes, I've known him for years. Michael replied truthfully. Captain Thomas Rivera had been one of Horizon's first pilots when Michael took over as CEO 8 years ago. And why would he want your opinion on fuel reports? Patricia asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Michael shrugged. Like I said, I work in aviation. The businessman across the aisle glanced up from his laptop, a smile playing at his lips. He'd been listening to their exchange and seemed to find it amusing. Patricia wasn't satisfied. What exactly do you do in aviation? She pressed, her previous disdain now mingled with uncertainty. I work primarily on the management side these days, Michael answered, deliberately vague. With which airline? Patricia asked, her eyes narrowing further. This one, actually, Michael replied, gesturing around them. Horizon Airways. Patricia's expression changed again. Now she seemed to be recalculating, wondering if he might be more important than she'd initially assumed. Michael had seen this transformation many times before. The sudden shift when someone realized they might have underestimated him. Oh? What position do you hold? She asked, her tone notably warmer. Before Michael could answer, another flight attendant, Lisa, who'd been with the company for nearly a decade, approached with the meal service cart. Mr. Reynolds, she greeted him with a warm smile. Chef Wilson prepared your usual today as requested by the office. And Mrs. Reynolds called to remind you not to forget to pick up the cake for Zoe's birthday tomorrow. Thanks. Lisa. Tell Marie in the office I appreciate her arranging it, Michael replied, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. His executive assistant always made sure he had his preferred meal, a simple grilled chicken salad, on his flights, knowing he preferred it to the heavier first-class options. Lisa placed his meal on his tray table, along with a handwritten note that he recognized as his wife's handwriting. He slipped it into his pocket to read later. Patricia watched this exchange with growing confusion. You have special meals prepared for you? She asked, her voice rising slightly. Who exactly are you? The businessman across the aisle finally chuckled audibly. When Patricia glanced at him sharply, he shook his head and returned to his laptop. Michael considered his options. He generally preferred to travel incognito, but Patricia's behavior had crossed a line from merely annoying to actively discriminatory. Perhaps it was time for a gentle reality check. I'm just someone who believes everyone deserves respect when they travel, regardless of how they dress or what they look like, he said. Meeting her eyes steadily, Patricia flushed slightly. I didn't mean to imply, she began, but Michael held up his hand. Let's just enjoy the rest of the flight, shall we? He suggested, unwrapping his cutlery. As the meal service continued, Patricia became increasingly aware that the flight attendants were treating Michael with unusual deference. They called him by name, asked about his family, and seemed genuinely happy to see him. After Lisa served Patricia her meal, the standard first-class chicken pasta dish, Patricia leaned over and whispered, Are you some kind of airline reviewer? One of those secret shoppers who evaluates the service? Michael shook his head. No, nothing like that. Celebrity? She guessed, studying his face more carefully. Definitely not, he laughed. The businessman across the aisle finally spoke up. He's being modest, he said to Patricia. Then looking at Michael, he added, Good to see you again, sir. That speech you gave at the Aviation Leadership Conference last month was truly inspiring. Your vision for the industry's future is exactly what we need right now. Patricia's eyes widened. She looked back and forth between Michael and the businessman, clearly trying to piece together the puzzle. Michael recognized the businessman now. David Chen, CEO of a major aircraft parts manufacturing company and one of Horizon's key suppliers. Thank you, David, Michael replied. How are things progressing with the new lightweight composite project? On schedule for next quarter, David answered. My team would love to give you a tour of the facility when you're in Chicago next month. Looking forward to it, Michael nodded. Patricia was now staring openly at Michael. Her champagne sat untouched as she seemed to reconsider every interaction they'd had since boarding. Michael could almost see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to reconcile his casual appearance with the growing evidence that he was someone of significance. Gregory returned to their row. Mr. Reynolds, Captain Rivera asked if you'd like to visit the cockpit after you've finished your meal. No pressure, of course. I'd appreciate that, thanks, Michael replied. He turned to Patricia, whose expression had transformed into one of confused embarrassment. Excuse me, he said politely, returning to his meal. Patricia barely touched her food, sneaking glances at Michael throughout the meal service. The disdain in her eyes had been replaced by uncertainty and a growing suspicion that she might have made a serious miscalculation. For his part, Michael ate quietly, occasionally making notes on his tablet. He thought about how this interaction represented exactly why he insisted on experiencing Horizon flights as a regular passenger whenever possible. It kept him connected to the real customer experience, both good and bad. As he finished his meal, he couldn't help wondering how Patricia would react when she finally discovered who he really was. The next hour of their flight promised to be interesting indeed. After the meal service, Gregory collected their trays. Michael noticed Patricia's food was barely touched, her attention clearly elsewhere. She kept glancing between Michael and her phone, where she appeared to be searching for something. "Everything all right with your meal?" Gregory asked her. "Yes, fine," she said distractedly. "Just not very hungry." When Gregory moved away, Patricia turned to Michael with a completely different demeanor than she'd shown earlier. Her smile was overly friendly, almost ingratiating. "So you must be quite high up at Horizon Airways," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Vice president of something important, I'm guessing?" Michael gave a non-committal shrug. "The company's been good to me." "I can tell," Patricia persisted. "The way the staff treats you, you must be very important." She leaned closer, dropping her voice. "My husband always says networking is everything in business. Perhaps we should exchange cards. My husband has many valuable connections at Henderson International." The complete turnaround in her attitude wasn't surprising to Michael. He'd seen it countless times. People who dismissed him based on appearance suddenly becoming eager to connect once they realized he might be useful to them. "I don't have my cards with me today," Michael replied, which was true. He rarely carried them when traveling incognito. Patricia's smile dimmed slightly. "Well, perhaps you could share your email or connect on LinkedIn." "I don't really use social media," Michael said, which was also mostly true. His communications team managed his minimal online presence. David Chen, who was still sitting across the aisle, suppressed a smile as he pretended to focus on his laptop. He caught Michael's eye briefly and gave a knowing look. Patricia was not deterred. "It's just that my husband might be very interested in speaking with you. Henderson International has been looking to expand their partnerships, and if you're in a position of influence at Horizon..." "I'll keep that in mind," Michael said politely. Gregory approached again. "Mr. Reynolds, Captain Rivera said you're welcome to visit the cockpit whenever you're ready." "Thank you." "Greg, I'll head up there now," Michael said, glad for the excuse to step away from Patricia's sudden networking enthusiasm. As Michael unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, Patricia touched his arm lightly. "I do hope we can continue our conversation when you return," she said, her tone completely transformed from the dismissive one she'd used earlier. Michael nodded politely and followed Gregory toward the front of the plane. As they moved through the curtain separating first class from the galley, Gregory whispered, "I'm sorry about your seatmate, sir. Would you like me to arrange a different seat for the remainder of the flight?" Michael shook his head. "No need. It's actually been educational." Gregory gave a knowing smile. "As you wish, Mr. Reynolds. The captain is expecting you." In the cockpit, Captain Rivera greeted Michael warmly. "Michael, good to see you. How's the family?" "They're great, Tom. Thanks for asking. Zoe has a dance recital tomorrow that I'm heading home for." "That little girl is growing up fast," Tom said with a smile. He'd been with the company since its early days and had watched Michael's children grow up through photos and stories over the years. "Too fast," Michael agreed. "So how's everything running today?" "Smooth as silk. The new fuel efficiency measures you approved last quarter are making a real difference. We're tracking about 7% better than projected." Michael nodded, pleased. "That's what I was seeing in the preliminary reports. The engineering team will be thrilled." They chatted about various operational matters for a few minutes, with First Officer Natalie Wong occasionally joining in. Michael always valued these candid conversations with flight crew. They often provided insights that never made it into official reports. "By the way," Tom said as their conversation wound down, I couldn't help noticing your seatmate seems like a real piece of work. Lisa mentioned there might be an issue. Michael sighed. Nothing I haven't dealt with before. Just someone making assumptions based on appearances. Tom shook his head. Some people never learn. Want me to make an announcement? Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have Horizon Airways CEO Michael Reynolds on board with us today. He grinned mischievously. Michael laughed. Definitely not. You know, I prefer to fly under the radar. Your call, Tom shrugged. But sometimes people like that need a wake-up call. We'll see how it plays out, Michael replied. For now, I'm more interested in how the new cockpit communication systems are working for you. They spent another 10 minutes discussing technical aspects of the plane before Michael thanked them and prepared to return to his seat. Give my best to Vanessa and the kids, Tom called as Michael left. Will do. Fly safe. When Michael returned to first class, he noticed several passengers looking at him with new interest. Patricia was still on her phone, but she immediately put it away when she saw him approaching. That was quite a long chat with the pilots, she remarked as he settled back into his seat. We had some catching up to do, Michael replied simply. Patricia studied him with new intensity. I hope you don't think I was being rude earlier, she said, her voice dripping with false concern. I'm just very particular about maintaining certain standards. I'm sure you understand being an executive yourself. Michael raised an eyebrow. What makes you think I'm an executive? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? The way everyone treats you, your relationship with the captain. Patricia leaned closer and whispered, I actually did a little searching while you were gone. There aren't many high-level black executives at Horizon Airways, so it wasn't hard to narrow down. Michael was curious about where this was going. And what did you find? Patricia's smile was triumphant, as if she'd solved a great mystery. You're the executive vice president of operations, aren't you? I saw a news article from last year mentioning a Michael in that position, though there wasn't a photo. Michael had to suppress a smile. Horizon had several executive vice presidents, including his good friend Victor Michaels, who headed operations. The confusion was understandable, is that what you think? Michael asked, neither confirming nor denying. It makes perfect sense, Patricia continued, now fully committed to her theory. That's why you're reviewing fuel reports and meeting with the captain. Very impressive career. My husband always says that companies these days are very focused on diversity and leadership. The implication was clear. She believed he had his position because of his race rather than his abilities. Michael felt a familiar weariness settle over him. Even when people like Patricia acknowledged his success, they often found ways to diminish it. Companies like Horizon are focused on finding the best talent, regardless of background, Michael said evenly. Everyone on our leadership team has earned their position through hard work and results. Oh, of course, Patricia backtracked slightly, realizing she might have overstepped. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that my husband says Henderson International has been under a lot of pressure lately to diversify their executive team. It's all anyone in the industry talks about these days. David Chen, who had been pretending not to listen, let out an audible sigh of exasperation. The industry talks about a lot of things, Michael replied. Innovation, sustainability, customer experience. Diversity is just one aspect of building a successful airline. Patricia nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. And Horizon has been doing remarkably well lately, hasn't it? My husband mentioned your company has been taking market share from Henderson for the past 2 years. We've had some success, Michael acknowledged modestly. So tell me, Patricia said, leaning forward conspiratorially, what's your secret? Henderson's board is desperate to turn things around. My husband says the CEO is on his way out. Michael had indeed heard rumors that Henderson International's CEO was on shaky ground after several quarters of declining performance, but discussing such matters with a random passenger, especially one married to a Henderson executive, would be inappropriate. I'm afraid I don't have any secrets to share, Michael said. But Horizon's approach has always been straightforward. We focus on treating all our customers with respect and dignity, regardless of what cabin they're seated in or what they're wearing. Patricia had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at this subtle reference to her earlier behavior. Yes, well, customer service is important, of course. At that moment, Lisa approached their row again. Mr. Reynolds, I have an update from the office. Ms. Diaz called to confirm that the board meeting has been moved to Wednesday instead of Tuesday to accommodate your family commitment tomorrow. Thanks, Lisa, please let Gabriella know I appreciate her rescheduling. Lisa nodded and moved away. Patricia's eyes widened at this new information. Board meeting? She repeated. You're on the board of directors? Before Michael could respond, an announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Atlanta in approximately 15 minutes. At this time, please make sure your tray tables are stowed and your seats are in the upright position. As Patricia fastened her seatbelt, she kept glancing at Michael with growing uncertainty. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message, and when she checked it, her expression changed dramatically. Oh my God, she whispered, staring at Michael with new recognition. You're not just on the board. You're Michael Reynolds. You're the CEO of Horizon Airways. Several nearby passengers looked over at her exclamation. David Chen finally laughed out loud, no longer bothering to hide the fact he'd been following their conversation. Took you long enough to figure it out, he commented to Patricia before returning to his laptop. Patricia's face flushed a deep red as the full realization of how she'd behaved toward the CEO of the airline settled in. She opened and closed her mouth several times, seemingly at a loss for words. Michael simply fastened his seatbelt and adjusted his seat to the upright position, maintaining the same calm demeanor he'd shown throughout the flight. The plane began its descent into Atlanta, and as the pressure changed in the cabin, the tension between Michael and Patricia seemed to grow even thicker. She sat rigidly beside him, her earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by a mortified silence. Michael knew this moment could go one of two ways. He could let her stew in her embarrassment, or he could find a way to turn this into something constructive. As the plane continued its descent, he considered carefully what he would say to her once they were on the ground. The plane touched down in Atlanta with a gentle bump, right on schedule. As they taxied toward the gate, Patricia remained frozen in her seat, staring straight ahead. The color had drained from her face, and she clutched her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. Michael maintained a calm exterior, though his mind was racing. Throughout his career, he had encountered countless people like Patricia, people who judged him based solely on his appearance until they learned who he was. He thought about all the black passengers who didn't have the shield of a CEO title to protect them from such treatment. What was their flight experience like? The plane came to a stop at the gate and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began the usual routine of gathering their belongings and standing in the aisle, but Patricia remained seated, seemingly unsure of what to do. Michael turned to her. Looks like we've arrived, he said neutrally. She finally looked at him, her expression a mix of embarrassment and fear. Mr. Reynolds, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Michael replied. He wasn't interested in making her grovel or watching her squirm, despite how uncomfortable she had made him feel earlier. But I do, she insisted, her voice lowered to avoid being overheard by deplaning passengers. My behavior was, I'm just so embarrassed. If you could possibly forgive, Michael held up a hand, gently cutting her off. This isn't about forgiveness, Ms. Wilson, she supplied quickly. Patricia Wilson. Ms. Wilson, Michael nodded. I'm not interested in public apologies or making you feel worse than you already do. But I would appreciate a few minutes of your time before we part ways, if you're willing. Patricia nodded quickly. Of course, anything. David Chen passed by their row, briefcase in hand. Good seeing you, Michael, he said, then added with a small smile. Interesting flight. Always is, Michael replied. Give my best to May and the kids, will do. Looking forward to that Chicago meeting. As David moved on, Gregory approached. Mr. Reynolds, your car is waiting at the curb whenever you're ready. Your bag has already been taken care of. Thanks, Greg. Please tell the driver I'll be about 15 minutes. And excellent work today, as always. Thank you, sir. Gregory paused, glancing briefly at Patricia. Will your companion be joining you? No, Michael replied. Ms. Wilson and I are just going to have a brief conversation in the terminal. Gregory nodded and moved on to help other passengers. By now, most of the first-class cabin had emptied. Patricia gathered her belongings, clearly nervous. As they exited the plane, several crew members nodded respectfully to Michael. He greeted each by name, asking about family members or referencing previous conversations. Patricia watched these interactions silently, her expression thoughtful. In the terminal, Michael led her to a quiet seating area away from the flow of traffic. They sat across from each other, Patricia perched on the edge of her seat like she might need to make a quick escape. I want you to know that I'm not going to call your husband's company or try to get you in trouble, Michael began, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Patricia's shoulders sagged with visible relief. Thank you. That's very generous considering how I behaved. This isn't about generosity, Michael clarified. It's about something more important. I understand, she said quickly. And I want to assure you that I don't usually, a racist? Michael supplied the word she was struggling to say. Patricia flinched as if he'd slapped her. That's not who I am, she whispered. I have black colleagues. My children have black friends. Michael had heard this defense countless times before. Ms. Wilson, I'm not here to label you or judge your entire character based on one interaction. But I do want you to understand something important. She nodded, waiting. What happened on that flight isn't unusual for me or for many people who look like me, Michael explained. The difference is I have the protection of a title. When people discover I'm a CEO, their behavior changes instantly, as yours did. But what about all the other passengers who don't have that protection? What's their experience like? Patricia looked down at her hands. I hadn't thought about it that way. Most people don't, Michael acknowledged. That's part of the problem. He leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something. When you first sat down next to me, what made you immediately uncomfortable? Patricia hesitated, clearly worried about saying the wrong thing. I'm looking for honesty, not what you think I want to hear, Michael added. After a moment, she spoke quietly. You didn't look like you belonged there. And what does someone who belongs in first class look like? Patricia struggled. More professional, I suppose. In business attire. I see plenty of people in casual clothes in first class all the time, Michael pointed out. Silicon Valley types in hoodies and jeans. Celebrities in sweatpants and baseball caps. Do they get the same reaction? Patricia didn't answer, but her expression told Michael she understood his point. I built Horizon Airways on the principle that everyone deserves respect, regardless of what they're wearing or what they look like, Michael continued. When I took over as CEO 8 years ago, the company was struggling. Our previous leadership had created a culture very much like what you described. Exclusive, rigid, focused on standards that often served as barriers. Patricia listened intently now, her embarrassment temporarily overshadowed by curiosity. We changed that, Michael said. We focused on making everyone feel welcome, from our budget seats to first class. We hired staff who genuinely care about customer experience. We invested in training about unconscious bias and inclusive service. And you know what happened? Patricia shook her head. Our profits tripled in 5 years. Customer satisfaction scores went through the roof. Staff retention improved dramatically. It turns out that treating people with dignity is not just the right thing to do. It's good business. I can see that, Patricia admitted. Your staff clearly loves working for you. They love working for a company that values them and the customers they serve, Michael corrected. Which brings me to why I wanted to talk with you. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small booklet. This is something we give to all our employees during their training. It's a collection of real experiences shared by our passengers, both positive and negative. Michael handed it to Patricia. I'd like you to read it and then pass it along to your husband. Not because I want to embarrass you, but because Henderson International might benefit from understanding what makes Horizon different. Patricia took the booklet, looking surprised by this unexpected turn in the conversation. You're not angry? She asked, confusion evident in her voice. I've been dealing with these situations my entire life, Michael replied honestly. Being angry at every person who makes assumptions about me would be exhausting. What matters more to me is creating change. He glanced at his watch. I need to get going. My daughter's dance recital is tomorrow and I promised I wouldn't miss it. Of course, Patricia said, standing up. She hesitated, then extended her hand. Thank you for not being what I expected. Michael shook her hand firmly. That's the point, isn't it? We're rarely what others expect when they judge us at a glance. As they parted ways, Michael headed toward the terminal exit where his driver waited. His phone buzzed with a message from his wife. Zoe's practicing her routine one last time before bed. Says she can't wait to show you tomorrow. Safe flight? Michael smiled and typed back, just landed. Interesting flight, but all good. Tell Zoe I can't wait to see her dance. Be home soon. He reflected on the encounter with Patricia as he walked. Would their conversation make a difference? He couldn't be sure. But throughout his career, he'd found that real change often started with these small, uncomfortable moments. Moments where people were forced to confront their own biases. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Gabriela Diaz, his chief of staff. Board presentation ready for Wednesday. How was the flight? Anything we need to address? Michael thought about it for a moment. Then he typed, "Actually, yes. I want to discuss expanding our crew training on handling discriminatory passenger behavior. Also, let's review our customer feedback collection to make sure we're capturing these experiences accurately." As he approached the exit, Michael noticed a young black woman in casual clothes being questioned by a gate agent at a first-class line for the next flight. She was dressed similarly to how Michael was, jeans and a sweater, and was holding what was clearly a first-class boarding pass. Yet the agent seemed skeptical. Michael detoured slightly and approached them. "Is there a problem here?" he asked pleasantly. The gate agent looked up, startled. "Mr. Reynolds." "No, sir, no problem. Just doing a routine check." "I see," Michael said, making a mental note to follow up on this routine check policy that seemed selectively applied. To the young woman, he smiled and said, "Enjoy your flight. Horizon Airways appreciates your business." The woman looked surprised but nodded. "Thank you." As Michael finally exited the terminal and spotted his waiting car, he thought about how many such interactions occurred every day across the aviation industry. His encounter with Patricia Wilson was just one drop in an ocean of similar experiences, yet each drop could create ripples. Perhaps Patricia would read the booklet and share its contents with her husband. Perhaps the gate agent would think twice before routinely checking passengers who didn't fit a certain profile. Perhaps the young woman would feel a little more confident the next time someone questioned her presence in first class. Michael's driver opened the car door for him. "Good flight, Mr. Reynolds?" Michael smiled slightly as he slid into the back seat. "Educational," he replied. "Very educational." As the car pulled away from the curb, Michael opened his briefcase and pulled out the speech he was working on for next month's company-wide meeting. The title at the top read, "Building a Truly Inclusive Airline, Our Next 5 Years." He took out a pen and added a new note in the margin. "Share today's experience as example." It would make a powerful opening, a real-world reminder of why their mission mattered. The car merged onto the highway toward home, where Zoe was waiting to show off her dance routine, and his wife had undoubtedly saved him dinner. As the Atlanta skyline receded in the distance, Michael felt a familiar determination settle over him. One flight, one interaction, one moment of recognition at a time. That was how change happened. And he was just getting started. 3 months later, Michael sat in his office at Horizon Airways headquarters, reviewing quarterly reports. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the spacious room with its modest furnishings. Unlike many corporate executives, Michael preferred a practical workspace, comfortable but not ostentatious. A knock on his door interrupted his concentration. "Come in," he called. Gabriela Diaz, his chief of staff, entered with a tablet in hand. Her efficient manner and sharp intelligence had made her invaluable to the company since Michael had promoted her 2 years ago. "Morning, Gabriela. What have you got for me?" Michael asked, setting aside his reports. "2 things," she replied, taking a seat across from him. "First, the new crew training program on handling discriminatory incidents has received outstanding feedback. Flight attendants report feeling better equipped to address situations without escalating them." Michael nodded, pleased. "That's great news. What's the second thing?" Gabriela swiped on her tablet and handed it to him. "This came in through our executive feedback channel yesterday. I thought you'd want to see it personally." Michael looked at the screen and was surprised to see a familiar name, Patricia Wilson. He hadn't thought about her since their encounter 3 months ago. He began reading her message. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, you probably don't remember me, but we met on a flight from Denver to Atlanta 3 months ago. I was the woman who behaved inappropriately toward you before discovering you were the CEO of Horizon Airways. I've started this email many times over the past weeks, struggling to find the right words. The simplest way to put it is this: our brief conversation changed something fundamental in how I see the world. After our meeting, I read the booklet you gave me, twice. Then I shared it with my husband as you suggested. The stories it contained from passengers who had experienced discrimination were eye-opening for both of us. Many described situations disturbingly similar to how I treated you. My husband brought the booklet to his executive team at Henderson International. It sparked a difficult but necessary conversation about their company culture. As a result, they've begun implementing changes to their training programs and customer service approach. My husband says their board was particularly struck by Horizon's superior customer satisfaction scores and retention rates. But the real reason I'm writing is more personal. Your kindness in the face of my behavior made me examine my own assumptions and prejudices in a way I never had before. It would have been easier, and completely justified, for you to embarrass me or report me to my husband's company. Instead, you chose to educate me. Since our encounter, I've joined a community discussion group focused on understanding racial bias. It hasn't been comfortable. In fact, it's been deeply uncomfortable at times, but it's been necessary. I'm learning to recognize the subtle ways prejudice shapes my thinking and working to change those patterns. I don't expect forgiveness or even a response to this message. I simply wanted you to know that our brief interaction had a lasting impact. Not just on me, but potentially on an entire airline's approach to customer service. With sincere gratitude, Patricia Wilson. Michael set the tablet down, thoughtful. What do you think? Gabriella asked. I think it's a start, Michael replied honestly. One person recognizing their biases doesn't change the whole system, but it's something. Gabriella nodded. By the way, Henderson International announced a new diversity initiative last week. Their press release mentioned being inspired by industry leaders who've demonstrated that inclusive practices drive business success. Michael raised an eyebrow. Without naming us, of course. Of course, Gabriella smiled. Corporate politics. Still, it's progress, Michael acknowledged. Any other developments I should know about? Gabriella consulted her notes. The incident tracking system we implemented after your flight has collected some interesting data. We've identified 3 airports where first-class passengers of color are randomly selected for additional verification at significantly higher rates than white passengers. Let me guess. Denver, Atlanta, and Dallas? Michael asked, naming the airports where Horizon shared gates with Henderson International. Exactly, Gabriella confirmed. We've already reached out to airport management about retraining their staff. I've scheduled meetings with their directors next month. Good, Michael said. What about our own house? Are we practicing what we preach? Gabriella's expression turned more serious. We're better than most, but not perfect. The hiring audit showed we still have gaps in upper management diversity, technical and pilot positions too. Michael nodded. This wasn't news, but it remained a priority. Let's expand the mentorship program for our junior staff and strengthen our recruitment partnerships with historically Black colleges and Hispanic-serving institutions. And I want to review our promotion pathways again. There might be invisible barriers we're missing. I'll set up a task force, Gabriella promised, making notes. After Gabriella left, Michael swiveled his chair to look out the window at the planes taking off and landing at the airport adjacent to headquarters. He thought about his daughter Zoe, now practicing for her next dance recital. He thought about the young woman he'd encountered at the Atlanta airport gate, and thousands like her who faced subtle questioning of their right to occupy certain spaces. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Reynolds, your 11 o'clock is here. Send them in, Michael replied. The door opened to reveal David Chen, the businessman from the flight, along with 2 members of his executive team. They exchanged greetings and settled around the conference table in Michael's office. Before we get started, David said, I wanted to mention something interesting. Remember that flight we shared a few months back? With that woman who didn't realize who you were? Michael nodded. I do. Well, her husband reached out to me last week. Apparently, he's leading some kind of cultural overhaul at Henderson International. Wanted to know how we handle diversity issues in our supply chain. And what did you tell him? Michael asked. That it's not just the right thing to do, it's good business, David replied. I sent him our supplier diversity report from last year. The one that showed our most innovative components came from minority-owned businesses we wouldn't have discovered without our expanded search criteria. Michael smiled slightly. Ripples in a pond. What's that? David asked. Nothing, Michael said. Just thinking out loud. Shall we get down to business? The meeting proceeded, focused on the next generation of fuel-efficient components that would help both companies reduce their carbon footprint. Throughout the discussion, Michael found his mind occasionally drifting back to Patricia's email. One interaction, however small, could sometimes spark unexpected change. 6 months later, Michael found himself in a familiar situation. He was sitting in first class on a Horizon flight from Chicago to San Francisco, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater after 3 days of business meetings. The seat beside him was still empty as boarding continued. He thought about how much had happened in the past 9 months since his encounter with Patricia Wilson. Horizon's new training programs were showing promising results. Reports of discriminatory incidents had decreased by 17%, while positive feedback had increased across all demographic groups. The airports they'd identified had implemented new staff training, and preliminary data showed improvement. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Gabriella. Henderson International just announced their new CEO, moving in the right direction. Michael was about to reply when someone stopped beside his row. He looked up to see an older white man in an expensive suit, eyeing the empty window seat with barely concealed dismay. "Excuse me," the man said stiffly. "I believe that's my seat." Michael stood to let him pass, noting the familiar look of discomfort on the man's face, the same expression Patricia had worn 9 months earlier. Here we go again, he thought. But then something unexpected happened. A flight attendant Michael didn't recognize approached them. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said professionally. "Mr. Reynolds, it's an honor to have you on board today. Is everything to your satisfaction?" The businessman's expression changed instantly from discomfort to surprise as he reassessed Michael. "Everything's perfect, thank you," Michael replied. "And you're new, aren't you?" "I don't believe we've met." "Rebecca Thompson, sir. This is my 3rd month with Horizon. I just transferred from Henderson International, actually." "Oh?" Michael's interest was piqued. "How are you finding it so far?" "Truthfully, it's like night and day," Rebecca replied. "The culture here is exactly what Henderson was trying to create with their new initiatives. But they were just starting the work that Horizon has been doing for years." The businessman beside Michael was now listening intently, his earlier discomfort forgotten. "That's good to hear," Michael said. "We're not perfect, but we're working on it." "Well, it shows," Rebecca assured him. "Can I get either of you a pre-flight beverage?" After she left to fetch their drinks, the businessman turned to Michael with an embarrassed smile. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I made some assumptions when I first walked up that I'm not proud of." Michael was momentarily taken aback by this unexpected acknowledgement. "I appreciate your honesty," he replied. "Henderson's new training really hammers home how damaging those snap judgments can be," the man continued. "I thought it was just corporate PR talk, but maybe there's something to it after all." Michael smiled. Change happens one person at a time. As the flight took off, Michael gazed out the window at the city below. The work was far from finished. Changing entrenched attitudes and systems took time, years, even decades. There would be resistance and setbacks along the way. But as he thought about Patricia's email, the businessman beside him who had recognized his own bias, and Rebecca who had brought her experience from one airline to another, Michael felt a cautious optimism. Each individual who questioned their assumptions created possibility for others to do the same. His phone buzzed again with a message from his wife. "Zoe got the lead in the school play. Says she wants to give you her audition speech when you get home." Michael smiled and typed back, "Tell her I can't wait to hear it. Nothing could make me prouder." As the plane climbed through the clouds, Michael returned to reviewing company reports. There was still so much to be done. But for now, he allowed himself to appreciate that even small moments of recognition could eventually lead to meaningful change. Sometimes, the most powerful tool against prejudice wasn't confrontation but conversation. Not shame but understanding. Not anger but the steady persistence of showing up, day after day, to do the necessary work. The plane leveled off above the clouds, and Michael looked out at the vast blue sky. The view from up here always reminded him of perspective. How problems that seemed immense on the ground could appear manageable from a different vantage point. There would always be more Patricia Wilsons in the world, but maybe, just maybe, there would also be more people willing to recognize their biases and work to change them. And that was a start worth building on.